When a crisis at the Galactic Youth Education Center forces instructors to let their youngest students play, they discover that human children's disorderly approach to learning might be exactly what the galaxy needs. The halls of the Galactic Youth Education Center held an almost religious silence, broken only by the soft hum of quantum computers and the occasional crystalline chime of its alien instructors. Through the curved observation window of Learning Pod Theta, Ash Theron watched another perfectly choreographed lesson unfold with mechanical precision. The massive station, anchored at the convergence point of three major space lanes, represented the galaxy's most ambitious experiment in multi-species education, a place where young minds from across the cosmos came to learn in rigorously optimized conditions. Ash moved her hand across the environmental controls, adjusting the display to track individual student biosignatures. After 8 months as the facility's first human education specialist, she'd learned to read the subtle signs of engagement, or more often, Specialist Theron. Administrator Xylex's crystalline form shimmered with frequencies that Ash had learned to recognize as barely contained frustration. The Central Education Council has reviewed your proposal regarding spontaneous developmental sessions. Their response is, as humans say, negative. Light rippled through Xylex's faceted surface in patterns that suggested deep disapproval. They were particularly concerned about your suggestion to reduce cognitive optimization protocols in favor of what you termed organic learning through unstructured play. Ash fought back the urge to tap her foot, a human gesture of frustration that still unnerved many of her alien colleagues. Through the observation window, a young Arxian named Lyrax had stopped reciting the prescribed quantum mathematics sequence, their sensory tendrils curling in what Ash recognized as boredom. Next to them, a human child named Kip was doodling star maps in the margins of their hollow display, while Nesix, a Palaxian, had started creating tiny gravity bubbles under their desk, a behavior their species typically used for. With respect, Administrator, Ash said, gesturing toward the learning pod. Look at their natural behavior. Lyrax isn't just distracted. They're using those tendrils to map magnetic field patterns in three-dimensional space. Kip's doodles are actually complex spatial relations. And Nesix's gravity bubbles? That's advanced field manipulation, disguised as. Xylex's crystalline surface flickered with interference patterns, their species equivalent of a dismissive sniff. Precisely why our protocols exist. Specialist, such undirected energies must be properly channeled through approved cognitive enhancement sequence. But that's just it, Ash persisted, pulling up her observation logs on the nearest hollow display. When these children think no one's watching, they naturally engage in activities that develop the exact skills we're trying to teach. The Arxians turn everything into magnetic field. Palaxian youngsters instinctively practice gravity manipulation through games. Even the crystalline children like yourself create complex refraction patterns during their rest period. The display filled with recordings. Youngsters from a dozen species finding ways to play despite the rigid structure. A group of Arxian children turning their magnetic sense training into an improvised game of tag. Palaxian students competing to create the most intricate gravity webs during meal breaks. Even some of the crystalline youth experimenting with harmonics when they thought the instructors weren't. Your point, Specialist Theron. Xylex's tone carried the particular harmonic that suggested they were humoring what they considered another irrational human notion. My point is that play isn't chaos. It's how young minds naturally explore and master their abilities. Every species does it, whether we approve or not. Instead of fighting these instincts, what if we worked? Before Xylex could respond, another figure approached, Meridix, the center's safety coordinator, their gelatinous form pulsing with urgent. Administrator, we're detecting unusual harmonic fluctuations in the primary gravity generators. Nothing critical yet, but the patterns are. Run a full diagnostic, Xylex ordered. Increase monitoring on all learning pods. We can't risk any disruption to the educational protocols. They turned back to Ash. As for your observations, Specialist Theron, I will add them to the quarterly review. Ash watched them glide away, their crystalline form refracting the pod's light into precise, orderly. Through the window, young Kip had graduated from doodling star maps to creating an elaborate game involving orbital mechanics, quietly teaching two Arxian children the rules through hand signals and diagrams. In that moment, Ash had no way of knowing that both she and Xylix were about to learn exactly how valuable undirected energies could. The first warning came as a subtle vibration through the station's quantum crystalline superstructure. Ash felt it in her bones before any alarm sounded. A rhythmic disruption that reminded her of jumping rope on Earth's play. The gravity generators weren't just fluctuating anymore. They were cycling through resonance patterns that shouldn't have been possible with their safeguard. Emergency protocols initiated in Learning Pods Alpha through EPS. The station's AI announced with artificial calm. Gravitational anomalies detected. All instructors implement standard containment procedures. Ash watched in horror as the carefully maintained artificial gravity began to ripple across the learning pods, like waves in a... But these weren't simple fluctuations. The gravity fields were forming complex, almost geometric. In Pod Beta, young Arxians floated helplessly, their magnetic sense overwhelmed by the changing field. Pod Gamma's crystalline students had instinctively formed defensive lattices, their bodies refracting emergency lights in prismatic. Administrator Meridix's gelatinous form pulsed with emergency frequencies as they approached Xylix. Standard containment procedures are failing. The gravity patterns, they're not random. They're forming some kind of coherent structure, but it doesn't match any known physics. Xylix's crystalline surface displayed urgent calculation patterns. Impossible. The safety systems are designed to prevent exactly this kind of harmonic cascade. Activate the emergency stabilizer. Already tried. Meridix rippled anxiously. The problem is, the generators aren't malfunctioning. They're working perfectly. Too perfect. They're creating synchronized gravity waves that are actually amplifying each. Ash studied the monitoring displays, something nagging at the edge of her consciousness. The gravity patterns seemed almost like the rhythmic games children created when left to their own devices. The resonance, she muttered. It's like a playground rhythm. Through the observation windows, the situation in the learning pods was deteriorating. The younger students, trapped in their educational modules, were being buffeted by waves of varying gravitational. Standard emergency protocols assumed adult responses, measured, calculated movements based on physics equations and safety procedures. But these were children, their reactions governed by instinct and emotion. We need to evacuate them, Ash insisted, watching as young Nesix tried unsuccessfully to create stabilizing gravity bubbles against the larger waves. These patterns are getting stronger, not weak. Impossible, Xylix chimed, their crystalline form vibrating with stress harmonics. The evacuation procedures require stable gravity cord. We cannot risk moving them until we restore normal gravitational conditions. As if in response to Xylix's declaration, the gravity generators pulsed again. In Pod Delta, a group of human children had abandoned their assigned positions and were moving with the wave. They weren't fighting the gravity shifts, but rather letting themselves flow with them, almost like they were playing in oceans. Look, Ash pointed to the monitor. The human children? They're treating it like a game. They're adapting to the... But before anyone could respond, the situation took an even more dramatic. The gravity waves began forming interference patterns, creating nodes of near-zero gravity interspersed with pockets of intense gravitational. The effect rippled through the learning pods, like a complex dance pattern, trapping some students in heavy gravity, while sending others floating helplessly toward the sea. The structural integrity of the learning pods will not withstand this for... Meridix warned, their gelatinous form rippling with calculations. We have perhaps 20 minutes before the gravitational stress begins causing critical failure. Ash watched as Kip, still in Pod Theta, began showing other students how to time their movements with the gravity. It wasn't just random play. The human child had instinctively recognized the pattern and was teaching others to use it. Something clicked in Ash's. Administrator, she said, her voice carrying the quiet certainty that comes with recognition. I think I know why this feels familiar. These gravity patterns, they're exactly like the kinds of rhythmic games children naturally create. What if the solution isn't in our emergency protocol? What if it's in how children actually learn to handle new challenges? Xylix's surface displayed skepticism patterns, but there was also a flicker of desperate calculation. With the situation deteriorating by the second, even the most rigid protocols might have to bend. Let them play. Ash's voice cut through the chaos of the emergency response center. We need to let them play their way through this. Absolutely not. Xylex's crystalline form vibrated with alarm frequencies. You suggest we abandon all protocols and let children play in a critical gravity failure? Look at what's already happening. Ash gestured toward the monitors. In Pod Theta, Kip had organized a game that looked remarkably like Follow the Leader, timing each movement with the gravity waves. 3 Archean children and a young crystalline student were mimicking the pattern, their success rate improving with each cycle. The gravity waves are forming predictable patterns, like rhythms in a playground game. Children naturally understand these kinds of patterns better than adults because they experience them through play. Remember those undirected energies you were so concerned about? This is exactly what they're for. Meredix's gelatinous form pulsed thoughtfully. The human children's movement pattern. They're achieving a 43% higher success rate in navigating the gravity fluctuations than our emergency protocols predicted possible. Ash pressed her advantage. Because they're not fighting the gravity waves, they're dancing with them. And look at Nesix. The young Palaxian had adapted their gravity bubble game, using small counterpulses to stabilize other students. They're turning their natural play behaviors into survival tools. A particularly strong gravity wave rattled the station. Xylex's surface displayed urgent calculation patterns. Even if your theory has merit, how do we implement it across all pods? We can't simply tell children to play their way to safety. Actually, we can. Ash moved to the central communication console. We just need to speak their language. Each species already has games that map to their natural abilities. We just need to help them adapt those games to this situation. After a moment of tense deliberation, Xilex gave their equivalent of a nod. Proceed. But Specialist Theron, if this fails. It won't, Ash said, activating the pod-wide communication system. Because this is what children do best. Her voice echoed through the learning pods. Attention everyone, we're going to play a new game. Kip, show everyone your gravity wave dance. Archean students, remember that magnetic field tag game you play during rest periods? Use those same sensing techniques to find the stable points in the gravity waves. Crystalline students, form your harmonic patterns. They'll help stabilize the waves. To the amazement of the adult observers, the children began responding. Years of suppressed play instincts surfaced as natural problem-solving tools. Palaxian children transformed their gravity bubble games into a transportation system, creating stable pockets to help less gravity-resistant species move safely. Archean students used their magnetic sense to map safe pathways, turning evacuation routes into an elaborate puzzle game. Remarkable, Meredix pulsed. They're creating a completely new emergency response protocol through play. Even Xylex's skepticism was wavering as they watched the children's success rate climb. The crystalline students had arranged themselves into a lattice formation, using their natural harmonic properties to create stable zones in the gravity field. They turned it into a coordination game, competing to see who could hold their position the longest while helping others pass through. The gravity waves, Meredix announced, their gelatinous form rippling with excitement. The children's activities are actually helping stabilize them. Their play patterns are creating constructive interference that's dampening the resonance cascade. Ash nodded, watching as Kip's Follow the Leader game evolved into an efficient evacuation chain. Because play isn't random, it's how young minds naturally learn to interact with their environment. Every game these children create is actually a sophisticated physics problem, being solved through experimentation and cooperation. Through the observation windows, something extraordinary was happening. The boundaries between species began to blur as children shared their techniques. Human jumping games combined with Palaxian gravity manipulation. Archean magnetic sensing merged with crystalline harmonic patterns. What had started as chaos was transforming into an intricate, multi-species rescue operation, all under the guise of play. They're not just surviving, Ash said softly, watching the children work together. They're innovating. Every game, every adaptation is teaching them something new about physics, about cooperation, about problem. This isn't just an evacuation. It's probably the most effective learning experience they've ever. The children had turned a potential disaster into the galaxy's most elaborate playground, and in doing so, were demonstrating exactly why humans had always believed in the power of. The evacuation transformed into a synchronized spectacle of multi-species cooperation, with each learning pod becoming its own unique playground of survival. In Pod Theta, Kip had refined their gravity wave dance into a precise science. 1, 2, 3, jump, they called out, leading a chain of students through a particularly tricky gravity path. The timing had to be perfect. Jump too early, and you'd hit a heavy gravity pocket. Too late, and you'd float helplessly into the sea. Behind them, Nesix had mastered the art of creating gravity bubble stepping stones, each one lasting just long enough for a student to pass. The young Palaxian's face showed intense concentration as they layered the bubbles in a complex three-dimensional path. Quick, they hummed in their species' melodic tones, matching the rhythm of the station's fluctuating gravity. The crystalline students had arranged themselves into what they called the Rainbow Bridge, their bodies refracting emergency lights while creating stable harmonic nodes in the gravity. Each crystal child vibrated at a specific frequency, creating safe passages through the chaos. Match my frequency, they chimed to passing students, teaching others how to resonate with their stabilizing. Lyrax and the other Arxian children had turned their magnetic sense into a navigation game, calling out hot or cold to guide students through the safest path. Their sensory tendrils danced with the magnetic fluctuations, reading the gravity waves like a complex musical. They'd created their own sign language to warn of approaching gravity surges, their tendrils forming shapes that meant wave, spike, or safe. In Pod Gamma, a particularly intense gravity wave threatened to destabilize the entire evacuation route. Without missing a beat, Kip called out, "Double Dutch formation." The human children immediately understood, creating two parallel lines of alternating gravity strengths, just like the ropes in the ancient jumping. Other species caught on quickly, timing their movements through the gaps like skipping through swinging. "Harmonic convergence approaching," warned a crystalline student, their surface flickering with calculation patterns. The children responded instantly, adapting their games to the new. The Palaxians layered their gravity bubbles in a double helix pattern, creating a spiral escape route. Arxian students used their magnetic sense to time the spiral's rotation, calling out spin and switch as the pattern shifted. The most remarkable moment came when they encountered a section of completely unpredictable gravity fluctuations. Instead of panicking, Kip shouted, "Everyone remember anti-gravity?" A game they'd secretly developed during rest periods suddenly became their sound. Students moved through the chaotic space using techniques they'd perfected while trying not to get caught by the gravity ghost in their forbidden. Xylix's monitoring crystals captured everything. Palaxian gravity bubbles combining with Arxian magnetic fields to create stable pathways. Crystalline students forming living prisms to redirect dangerous energy bursts. Human children teaching others how to ride the gravity waves like playground swings. Each successful movement was met with cheers in a dozen different species vocalization. The station's AI struggled to categorize the children's methods, its protocols unable to match their creative. Traditional emergency algorithms calculated their movements as highly inefficient, even as the children achieved unprecedented success. They weren't following the optimal paths. They were creating new ones, turning the crisis into a collaborative game of their own. Gravity spike incoming. Lyrax's tendrils sensed the danger first. Without hesitation, the crystalline students reorganized their formation into a fountain pattern, something they'd created while playing with light during meditation period. The human children recognized the shape from their London Bridge game, instinctively knowing when to pass through and when to. As they approached the final evacuation point, the children faced their biggest challenge, a massive gravity well that had formed between them and safety. Traditional protocols would have declared it insurmountable, but Kip, watching the wave patterns, realized something. "It's just like jump rope," they exclaimed. But in 3 dimensions, the next few moments were a symphony of coordination. Palaxian gravity bubbles formed the rope, swinging in a precise pattern. Crystalline students created harmonic anchors at crucial points, while Arxian children used their magnetic sense to time the cycles. Human students taught the others how to read the rhythm, when to run, when to jump, when to tuck and roll. One by one, they made it through, each success celebrated with the pure joy that only children at play can express. They weren't just escaping danger. They were mastering it, transforming a deadly serious situation into the ultimate playground challenge. The last student passed through, just as the gravity well began to collapse. They'd done it, turned an impossible evacuation into a triumph of collaborative play. And more importantly, they'd proven that sometimes the most sophisticated solution is also the most natural one. Let children do what they do best. In the aftermath of the crisis, the Galactic Youth Education Center underwent a profound transformation. Administrator Xylix stood before the Central Education Council, their crystalline form displaying uncharacteristically dynamic patterns as they presented the incident. The children achieved a 98.7% success rate using methods that defied every established protocol. More significantly, post-crisis assessments show unprecedented improvements in their practical understanding of quantum physics, gravitational dynamics, and interspecies cooperation. The council chambers buzzed with various species versions of murmured discussion. Ash, standing at the presentation podium beside Xylix, pulled up a holographic display of the children's achievements. "What you're seeing isn't just successful crisis management," she explained. "It's a completely new educational paradigm." The children didn't just survive, they innovated, collaborated, and taught each other in ways our structured programs never achieved. The evidence was irrefutable. Palaxian students demonstrated a 40% improvement in their gravity manipulation skills. Archean children had developed entirely new applications for their magnetics. The crystalline youth showed remarkable advances in harmonic theory. Even more striking were the psychological assessments. Stress levels during the crisis had been lower than during standard examination. Perhaps most remarkable, Meredix added, their gelatinous form displaying graphs of the data, is how the children have continued to apply these learning methods. They're spontaneously organizing multi-species study groups, using games to explore complex physics concepts, and achieving testing scores that exceed our highest projections. The Council's decision was unanimous. The Galactic Youth Education Center would implement a new, integrated play learning curriculum, with Ash appointed to head the development. Traditional structured lessons would be balanced with periods of guided play, allowing children to explore and develop their natural learning instincts. Xylix, in a stunning shift from their previous stance, became one of the program's strongest advocates. "We believed we were imposing order on chaos," they chimed during the announcement ceremony. "Instead, we were suppressing the natural order that exists within play itself." The impact rippled throughout galactic society. Other education centers began adopting similar methods, reporting similar success. The crisis had demonstrated something profound about learning: that the seemingly chaotic approach of human children, their instinct to turn everything into play, wasn't a disadvantage to be corrected. It was an evolutionary advantage to be embraced. As Ash watched a new group of students in the redesigned learning pods, she smiled at the sight of young Kip teaching a crystalline child a new variation of gravity, while Lyrax and Nessix collaborated on a magnetic gravity puzzle game of their own invention. The children weren't just playing, they were innovating, exploring, and growing in ways the old system never imagined. "Perhaps," Xylix chimed beside her, their crystalline surface displaying thoughtful patterns. "This is why humans achieved spaceflight so quickly. You never stopped playing with the universe." The legacy of the gravity wave incident, as it came to be known, extended far beyond educational reform. Within 5 years, the Galactic Youth Education Center had become a model for a new understanding of cognitive development across species. Research papers analyzing the event filled academic databases throughout known space, with titles like "The Physics of Play" and "Cross-Species Learning Through Adaptive Recreation." But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed human educational methods. What had once been dismissed as primitive and unstructured was now recognized as a sophisticated approach to problems. Human children were no longer seen as undisciplined. They were recognized as natural innovators, their play-based learning style offering unique advantages in an ever-changing universe. The original student participants became minor celebrities in educational circles. Kip went on to develop new training programs for emergency response teams, incorporating game-based scenarios that dramatically improved performance across all species. Nessix and Lyrax collaborated on a series of educational toys that combined Palaxian gravity manipulation with Archean magnetic sense training, spawning an entire industry of play-based learning tools. As for Ash Theron, she often found herself standing at that same observation window, watching new generations of students from across the galaxy learn through play. The sound of laughter and its various alien equivalents had become a common echo through the station's corridors, each peel representing another small discovery, another boundary, another connection. Sometimes, she would tell new instructors during orientation. The most serious learning happens when we remember how to